I have lost yet another game because my lane was ruined by my support. If you're this person, then this video is for you. Most carry players don't realize how much control they have over the outcome of their lane and blame it all on their support player when they lose. I will show you what you're probably doing wrong and how you can fix it. Starting with the first aspect, and I will probably sound like a broken record now, but please practice your last hitting. I cannot stress this enough. You might be thinking that why the fuck does this guy always bring up practicing last hitting? Think about it like this. You play Dota against an opponent who will be contesting you in the lane. Every last hit that you try to get, your opponent will contest them. If your opponent is even slightly better than you in terms of mechanical last hitting, they will beat you. And when they do, combined with your other mistakes in the lane, you will end up with sub 3k net worth at 10 minutes. And then you will complain about your support player doing nothing in the lane and speaking in some language you cannot understand. Last hitting is the absolute basic but is extremely important. In the lane, your initial target in terms of farming is 60 last hits at 10 minutes, which I went over in my previous video. Most of the creeps out of those 60 are going to be lane creeps. If you can't last hit for shit, you're never achieving that goal. Now for those who don't know how to practice last hitting, go to arcade section in Dota and download a game called Training Polygon. Load it up and play the last hit trainer inside it with your desired hero and starting items that you would usually buy in a real game. Do this for 10 minutes every day before you play a pub. The whole concept of last hit training seems boring, and I do agree with that, but what I do to make it more interesting is that I treat it as if I'm in the gym aiming for my new PR. PR is short for a personal record. For example, if you had 40 last hits in your first go, aim for higher when you do it again, and so on and so forth. Aim for higher. Lastly, play something in the background. I use music and 10 minutes pass by really fast. Now we'll move on to aggro. Some of the things that I will discuss here can be practiced in the last hit trainer against a sniper bot, so I would advise you to do that. Aggroing will enable you to lane the hardest of matchups. In my experienced opinion, if your aggro is bad, the only way you come out alive out of a lane is if the enemy is horrendously bad. And on this channel, I only teach things that are in your control. Here are some aggro tips that you can use to significantly improve your laning phase. In the laning phase, there are two positions, a comfortable position and an uncomfortable position. A comfortable position is where the enemy cannot attack you, meaning you are completely uncontested and chilling. An uncomfortable position is where the enemy will shred you to pieces, meaning that you will be heavily contested. I'm sure all of you have been in a position where you walked up to secure a last hit and lost all of your HP. That is the uncomfortable position. In terms of aggroing and laning in general, you have to think of ways to bring the enemy wave to a position where you are either completely uncontested or minimally contested. That is the comfortable position. Here are two examples. In the first example, you will see this player go to an uncomfortable position to secure a last hit and get killed by the enemy. In the second example, you will see this player stay in their comfortable position and still manage to secure the last hit without being contested by the enemy. What is the difference between the two? The player in the second example used aggro to bring the creeps towards him rather than going to the uncomfortable position, and as a result, the last hit was easily secured without getting harassed. The player in the first example did not use aggro and ended up getting fucked for it. In short, bring the creeps towards yourself to your comfortable position rather than going to them, which is the uncomfortable position. By doing this, you ensure that you get the goal from the last hit and do not lose all of your HP. Oftentimes, players don't understand why they are getting denied so much. This happens more often on ranged heroes in comparison to melee heroes. The main reason behind that is ranged heroes have a projectile, and it takes time for the projectile to reach the target. And in that duration, it is very easy to get denied by the enemy, especially if the enemy is a melee hero because they don't have a projectile. In terms of securing last hits, the distance between the hero and the creep matters a lot, because the closer you stand to the creeps, the faster your attack or projectile will reach. One way to not get denied is to stand super close to the creeps as a ranged hero, but that is quite risky. The goal is to have the creeps closer to you and away from the enemy, which will result in them being unable to deny because either they will be out of range to land their attack as a melee hero, or their projectile will take more time than yours will as a ranged hero. Now, if standing closer to the creeps is risky, as you have to worry about the enemy heroes, what is a way to displace the creeps towards yourself and away from the enemy? You guessed it right, aggro. The trick is to either aggro the creeps away from the enemy to a place where they will have trouble reaching them, or aggro the creeps when they are about to die, resulting in the enemy getting out of range to deny it and you securing the CS. This can be practiced against the sniper bot in the training polygon as well, and you should definitely do that. Aggro can be used to bring the wave back from near the enemy tower back to near your own tower. Most players just give up when their wave pushes near the enemy tower, waiting for their support to pull as they are scared to approach the wave in that position. You don't have to wait for your support to pull and can use aggro to bring the wave back. There are some things to consider before attempting this. The first thing you need to figure out is the enemy's kill threat on you. Ask yourself, if I try to aggro the wave towards myself from that spot and the enemy goes on me, can they 100 to 0 me? If the answer is no, then you can trade some of your HP to bring the wave back to near your tower, where it is easier to play. To further solidify your hypothesis, ask yourself, does my hero have a way to get out of a bad situation? For example, a hero like Juggernaut can spin away in case things go bad. If the answer is yes, then you can almost always bring the wave back. If any of these conditions are met, you can attempt this. The concept is pretty simple. In this example, you can see Arteezy on the Alchemist going near the wave but not fully approaching it, just aggroing it from a safe distance, then after the 3-second aggro cooldown is over, he aggros it again, and the wave comes closer to his tower rather than being stuck at the enemy tower. If he did not do this, the wave would be stuck outside the enemy tower and he would not be able to see us. One crucial thing to look at here is that every time he aggros the creeps, he makes sure to hit them so the creeps stay on him. In order to make sure the creeps don't deviate and constantly follow you, hit the creeps so they don't de-aggro on something else. I've seen players mess up the placement of the creep waves by pushing it and have no idea about how to bring it back to the default spot. This is kind of similar to the previous thing we've discussed, but this is much simpler and easier to do in comparison. By using aggro properly, you can manipulate the placement of the creep waves. Here are 3 examples. In the first example, you can see that Dire has 3 creeps, whereas Radiant has 2 creeps. This basically indicates that the lane will push into the Radiant side. You can also see that the next Dire wave is approaching soon and will link up with the Radiant creeps. Void aggros the melee creep a bit backwards and links it up with his upcoming wave, and his creep wave aggros on the enemy melee creep. As a result, the wave ends up being closer towards Yatoro's tower, whereas if he did not aggro the melee creep, the wave would have ended up at this spot, which is not ideal for Yatoro. In the second example, you can see that both Dire and Radiant have the same amount of creeps, meaning the lane will stay still. But here's the catch. If Windranger aggros the Dire melee creep and pulls it back to her upcoming wave, she can essentially do the same thing that Void did in the previous example. Yatoro already knows this and aggros the enemy melee creeps towards his range creep and gets it killed, and then holds it outside of his tower. This results in his upcoming wave being aggroed to those creeps, and as a result, the lane Equilibirium favors Yatoro yet again. In the third example, you can see that Dire creeps are already in a bad spot in terms of safety for the Templar Assassin. Dire has 2 creeps and Radiant has 3, which indicates that the lane will push into Dire. But the upcoming Dire wave isn't so far, and by the time the 2 creeps die, the next creep wave will end up at the same spot. You can see that in this case, Thea does not pull the creeps back and link it up to her upcoming wave like Void did. And as a result, the next wave also ends up at an unsafe spot where Thea feels scared to contest last hits. This is a bad example. With these minor aggro tricks, you can change the entire outcome of the lane. Aggro can be used offensively as well. If you're stronger in lane or if the enemy is missing from the lane for any reason, you should aggro the enemy melee creeps onto your ranged creep. There are advantages to it. If you know that you're stronger than the enemy and you aggro like this, you essentially give them 2 options. One is to either give up the range creep and get it denied, and the other is to approach the range creep and try to secure it but either die or lose HP in the process. In both scenarios, it's a win-win situation for you. Similarly, if the enemy is unable to reach the wave or away from the lane for any reason, when you aggro the enemy melee onto your range creep and then deny your range creep, in this case, the enemy gets 0 experience for it instead of the 50% just because they are nowhere near in the XP range. Another good part about this is that when your range creep dies, your creep wave doesn't push into the enemy because you have a creep deficit. Oftentimes, I've seen people getting double waved inside their tower and are either forced away or just die. This is mainly because people don't understand how double waving works and how you can counter it. Double wave occurs when you don't do anything about the increasing number of creeps of the enemy. In this example, you can see that Radiant has 5 creeps and Dire has only 2. You can also conclude that when the next wave arrives in the lane, this number is going to increase to 9 for Radiant and 4 for Dire, as the initial Dire creeps will die to the 5 very quickly. The Spectre tries to hold the creeps and keeps running around with them, and as a result, she loses the majority of her HP, and after that, it's a 9v4 for the creeps. Eventually, the Spectre gets a double wave under her tower and dies because of that. Now the question is, how could she have avoided this scenario? If we go back to where it all started to happen here, instead of tanking the creeps and holding them outside of the tower, the Spectre should have aggroed them inside the tower and gotten them killed. And as a result, the number of creeps would have lessened. The basic idea in the laning phase is to have the same amount of creeps on both sides. And the ideal number is 4v4. As long as you have that, the creeps will stay at the same spot. This is how you can avoid being double waved inside the tower. Lastly, for the aggro section, I'll give you 2 general tips. Number 1 is when you have more creeps than the enemy does, always aggro the enemy melee creeps onto your range creep and get it killed. This way, the number of creeps becomes the same and your wave does not push into the enemy. Number 2 is you should always aggro the enemy melee onto your range as long as your range creep is not inside your tower range. This gets your range creep killed, which A, does not push your lane into the enemy, and B, lets you see us easier from a comfortable position. You can literally do this every wave as long as it's not in tower range. Before we move on to lane farming, please make sure to like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm, and also subscribe. If you do all of the things that we've discussed before properly, then there's a good chance you will be winning the lane and be in a position to execute the lane farming patterns. These farming patterns will help you get more than 60 last hits by the 10th minute mark. After a few levels in an item like treads on your hero, you can start shoving in the lane and farm the side camps. After you have a few levels in an item like treads on your hero, you can start shoving in the lane and farm the side camps. For example, when Juggernaut is level 5 with 3 levels in spin, he can start doing that. The goal is to farm as much as you can in a minute. You need to think about Dota in terms of a minute, and as a carry in the early game, you need to focus on farming. The pattern is quite straightforward. Every minute, 2 waves will spawn. Your goal is to farm both those waves and something on the side. In this example, you can see Medusa pushing in the wave and then proceeds to farm the side camp. After that, she comes back for the wave. She farms the wave and afterwards, she proceeds to farm the camps behind their tower. During this time, she farmed a total of 2 waves and 2 camps, resulting in 12 creeps. She could have farmed more if the small camp wasn't blocked. That's all that you have to do. The most crucial thing here is to shift your mindset from pressuring to farming after you have levels and an item, and play to push in the lane and farm the side camps. The more time you waste, the less farm you will get. While you're farming neutral camps, keep looking at where the wave is so you don't miss out on it. Remember, waves are significantly better than neutral camps. If you are interested in private coaching, you can join my Discord, link in the description. Please make sure to subscribe and like the video for more high quality content like this. Do let me know in the comments if you have any feedback. Otherwise, have a nice day and good luck with your games.